having empathy and caring about other people could lead you to the happy ending that you're looking for. I had a fantastic reading month. I found multiple 5-star reads, new favorites, things that were unexpectedly excellent. It was just a really, really great month, and I am so excited to share all of the books that I read this month with all of you. I have been kind of wanting to read this book since it first came out, but I like to read my books on ebook more than physical, and none of my libraries have this book available in a Kindle edition, and I hate reading on the tablet, so I had to talk myself into reading the physical book. But I am so glad that I did, and actually, now that I've started reading physical books again, I read several books this month in physical format, so I'm just really glad for that. I have a reading vlog documenting my experience reading Tress that I will link to down below, so you can check that out if you would like to see more of my thoughts about it. But I thought that it was a very charming story. I see it compared to Princess Bride a lot, and it is a lot like Princess Bride, but the thing I loved was that Tress does not just sit and wait for someone to rescue her or to pull her out of her life. One of my favorite things about Tress is that it was a book that was very much about a found family. While Tress is on this voyage, she meets various people and she wins them over through kind of just pure pluck and determination and a big helping of empathy. I think that one of the great things about this book, what makes it so lovely to read, is that Tress really depends on empathy and optimism. She never gives up on rescuing Charlie, even when things are hard. There's nothing cynical about this book, and I find that, you know, there is some fantasy and there is a time and a place for fantasy that is very dark and very cynical. But right now, sometimes I feel like our world itself that we live in real life can be very cynical and can be very dark. And it's so nice to read something that makes you feel like there is so much hope, and that having empathy and caring about other people could lead you to the happy ending that you're looking for. So I gave this book 5 stars. I loved it, and if you are new to Brandon Sanderson, I actually think it could be a good introduction. It's a little bit different from his other works, but it is a standalone, and if you like it, then you could continue on to something like Mistborn and have an idea of what you're in for. My Kindle Unlimited subscription is going to be ending soon, so I'm trying to work my way through the books that I haven't read yet that were on my TBR. So one of the books that I read this month was The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This book was sold to me as kind of a more mature romantasy story. Characters themselves, at least the female character, Oriah, she's fairly young, but she has a lot of maturity. She doesn't make stupid decisions for no reason. She isn't impulsive. She's very measured. I thought she was a fantastic character. I really loved her. The story centers around a series of trials. Oriah is a human who has been raised by Vincent, the king of the vampires who live in this world. She's always been weak. She's always been hunted at court. Her father has always had to protect her. And so she enters this set of trials that takes place every so often, and if she wins, she will be granted anything that she would like. She gets to ask a goddess herself for one request. Because she is a human in a trial with a lot of vampires, she's not favored to win. And eventually she teams up with a vampire. His name is Rain. It is spelled R-A-I-H-N because it's a fantasy book, so of course it is. And, you know, I really liked him as well. I thought that the romance itself did a pretty good job of building slowly. I didn't feel like they immediately fell in love. I didn't feel like they immediately fell in lust, which is something that is a big turnoff for me in a book. I thought it was all extremely well done. And one thing that I really liked was that Rain never does anything to Oriah that he does not ask her if she is okay with first. And I think it would be so great if we could normalize the idea that asking for consent can be sexy within a romance novel, because I cannot deal with the alternative to that. It was a good romantasy. The trials were exciting. Everything, the other characters, the vampires, they were scary. They were mean, they were awful. They were not nice, sparkly vampires. But in the end, I ended up giving this book a 3.5. And you may say, that sounded like a really positive review. Why did you give it a 3.5? And that's because of the last 15% of the book. I'm not going to spoil it, but there are some twists that the plotline takes that I personally did not enjoy. It wasn't where I thought that the storyline was going, and it just made me really upset, which I guess says something about how much I liked this book, because I was all in. I was gonna give it 4.5 stars, and then I probably gave the last 15% of the book 2 stars. So we're gonna average that out to a 3.5. Now, does that mean that I'm not going to read the sequel? Absolutely not. I am totally gonna read that sequel. I need to know where this goes. If you are looking for a romantasy that has characters who are a little bit more mature in their thought processes, then I would recommend this. If you like vampires and you're happy that vampires are back, totally recommend it. The writing's pretty good. There are some things, like there are a lot of curse words that are kind of made up that they say over and over again. That's not really my thing. It was a little weird, a little bit repetitive, but other than that, I don't have a lot of complaints. So I think if you're a romantasy person, I think you would probably like this book. Check it out. This month, I read Circe by Madeline Miller, which is a book that I have been highly anticipating reading for quite some time. I think the cover's really pretty. Very metallic, very shiny. I did read this partially in audiobook form, partially in physical form. I just kind of switched off whenever I could. The audiobook of this is one that I would definitely recommend. I thought the narrator was really good and I didn't think it was too slow. So if you like audiobooks, this is a good one to try. I read The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller several years ago, and it completely destroyed me emotionally. I was all in on that book. I can see some of the criticisms that people have of it, but I don't really care. I just thought her writing was so beautiful. I thought the characters were dynamic and the love story was so good. So I've kind of been putting off reading Circe because I was convinced that nothing was going to do it for me quite the way that Song of Achilles did. But I decided it was finally time. I've seen a few people I follow reading this book lately, and I got it in from the library and decided this was the moment. This was my stretch book for February that I didn't know if I was going to get to, but I did get to it, so. Circe tells the story of Circe, who is a minor goddess in Greek mythology. I did not know very much about her, other than the fact that she encounters and has a relationship with Odysseus in the Odyssey. We follow Circe from the time that she is born. She is the daughter of the sun god, and we see that she is not favored by her father. We see that she is strange, not as beautiful as her sister, and she grows up kind of neglected and sort of on her own. As she gets older, she discovers through a series of events that I won't spoil for you that she is a witch. She has the ability, mostly through various herbs and plants, to perform magic. We follow her from her childhood. We follow her as she grows up and eventually does something that causes her to be exiled from her home. The entire book is told over the course of several centuries. It's not clear how many, but it's quite a long period of time. And it takes place with kind of these individual stories or vignettes. It's not one story the way that Song of Achilles was, where it was just focused around the Trojan War. Because it was not quite as focused, I found it hard to connect quite as much as I did with the Song of Achilles. But that does not mean that I did not like this book. I cried at least twice. I could not put it down. I read it extremely quickly. I thought that Madeline Miller's writing was extremely beautiful. In fact, I thought that it had actually gotten even more beautiful since the Song of Achilles. And I did enjoy the fact that it's clearly almost a feminist take on the story of Circe and how she is portrayed as a villain within Greek mythology, but perhaps, you know, she was a real being who did these things because in many ways she was not allowed to be anything else. I gave this book 4 stars, and I would highly recommend it if you have an interest in Greek mythology or Greek retellings. If you've read Song of Achilles and you haven't gotten to this one yet, then you definitely should, because I think if you loved her writing in that book, you're also going to love her writing in this book. I have seen that Madeline Miller is currently working on a retelling of the Persephone myth, and I love that one. I recently completed the video game Hades, so I sure would love to see a book about that story. So I'm looking forward to that, but 4-star read for me, absolutely great one. The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jiminez. I'm gonna hold this up. It is a gorgeous cover, and it is something that was completely not on my radar before the end of the year last year, and it surprised me in absolutely the best way. I watch a lot of BookTube. I'm sure that if you're here, you probably watch a lot of BookTube as well. Last year, I noticed a lot of the creators that I follow they started talking about this book. And one thing I noticed was that they all seem to have a difficult time discussing what the book is about. Now that I've read this book, I understand their pain, because it's a very difficult book to describe because the structure is so unusual. The book centers around a play that is taking place inside a dream. There are more POVs in this book than I think I have ever seen in a single book. And I'm not someone who loves a book that has just 900 POVs, but this book finds a way to make it really work. Every character, from merchants that you meet very briefly to soldiers who are slain and just give you a little bit of their history, have a chance to have their story told. And it's told through this kind of Greek chorus device. Within the book, you will see that there are places that are kind of set aside, and the italics are actually the other character or the Greek chorus speaking. In this case, it's talking about one of the archers in the story who has loosed his bow accidentally. And he says, "It was my second time holding a bow outside of practice." And that is the only little bit of that character's POV that we get, but it adds so much to the story because the world feels alive. You never feel like these characters are just set dressing who just exist to move the plot along for the main characters. They are alive, they are real, they have backstories and hopes and dreams, and you get to hear these just little tiny bits, and it is so moving. The other device that's really unusual in this book is that we have these kind of almost like stage directions. And you can see just these constant little places where you have just one line of the story that's brought out. For instance, the theater is quiet. It's really, I have never seen anything like this, to be honest. I will say that I like to listen to the audiobook of my books sometimes while I am reading them. When I'm in the car, I like to hear the audiobook. I could not do this on audiobook. The narrator, you know, he tries so hard to differentiate all of these different parts and these different people and the stage directions, and I was just confused. So my recommendation would be to either read it as an ebook or a physical book. I actually preferred it as a physical book because then I could really see the stage directions and the different POVs coming up, and that really helped me to get immersed in the story. For about the first 60 pages of the book, I wanted to quit so bad. I almost DNF'd it. It was so hard to really get immersed in the style of storytelling. But because I'd seen so many good things, I kept going, and I found that I kept going back to it even when I thought I had put it down for good. And I am so glad that I did not put it down for good, because this story really is going to stick with me. So what's the story about? We have 2 main characters. Their names are Jun and Kima. And Jun is a prince of this kingdom that we are in this story. And he has been raised to really just be the most bloodthirsty of all soldiers. He's been raised to fight without a conscience. So that's his story. He's been, you know, part of the ruling class of this world. The other character, Chemo, we don't know as much about his backstory. So they are on a quest. I'm not going to explain too much about the quest because there's so much about this story that you will want to discover for yourself. But they spend the entire time on a quest on the road. And the entire time that they're on the road, they're getting to know each other, they're fighting each other, they don't like each other, and eventually they fall in love. Their love story is very touching. It's very understated. It's not got a lot of words, but I just loved everything about it. I gave this book 4.5 stars. The only thing that kept it from being a 5-star for me was the little epilogue chapter, which I just, for reasons, didn't care for as much as the rest of the story before it. But in no way did that ruin my experience with this book. If you have an interest in fantasy, especially if you also like literary fiction and you're interested in things that I would consider to be more literary fantasy, then I would highly recommend picking this book up and promising yourself that you will not give up before you get to at least 100 pages, because it's hard, but I promise you it is worth it. I did DNF one book in the month of February, and that was SwordHeart by Kingfisher. Kind of a it's me, not the book situation. I think the book is super charming. I got to about 75 pages, and for some reason, I was just not in the mood to read a humorous romantasy this month. So I went ahead and sent my copy back to the library, but I'm sure that eventually I'm going to pick it up again. And in no way is this a warning about that book, but I did have it on my TBR for February, and I did try it, and I did not make it all the way through. Only one DNF, not bad. So now I'm going to go through the books that I read in the earlier half of the month a little bit quickly, because I do have a mid-month wrap-up video that I will link down below if you'd like to hear some more in-depth reviews of these books. I did reread The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson this month, and I gave it 5 stars. If you are somebody who has read Stormlight Archive, I would be really interested to know if you are also planning to reread them in anticipation of the final book of this era of Stormlight coming out this year. I've only read the first 2 previously, so this is a reread for me. I actually upped my rating from 4 stars to 5 stars. Don't know why I gave it 4 stars before. But I read it in 2012, so that was a different version of me from the version of me who's read a lot more fantasy and knows exactly how good this book is. It is an 1,100-page book. It does not feel like it. Brandon Sanderson is a master of pacing. He does such a good job splitting up the multiple POVs to make it so that you always feel like the story is progressing forward and you never feel like it's never ending, which is, for me, sometimes a problem with long fantasy books. I get very tired if I don't feel like the story is moving along. 5 stars. If you haven't started the Stormlight Archive, really, what are you doing? If you read fantasy, you need to read Stormlight Archive. It's my favorite Brandon Sanderson, and I highly recommend it, so I'm looking forward to reading all the rest of these books this year. I also read Emily Wilde and the Map of the Otherlands this month. I did talk about this in my earlier video as well, so you can look at that if you want to know some more, but I can tell you that you need to read this book. This book is so charming. Just like charming to the max. I love the romance. I thought it was better than the first book. I thought that not having to have them hate each other for the first part of the book just made the book better, which I don't usually think. Usually the couple gets together and I'm like, this is really boring now, but no. Super charming. The plot line was so fun. I enjoyed Emily, I enjoyed Wendell, I enjoyed the new characters. I like where it ended, and I am looking forward to seeing where the 3rd book goes. I think it's gonna be fantastic. 5 stars. If I didn't say that, 5 stars. Then I read a graphic novel called Lunar New Year Love Story, which I gave 4 stars to. I thought it was very charming and cute. It is a young adult graphic novel. If you have a young person in your life who you think enjoys graphic novels and enjoys sweet little love stories, I would highly recommend it. It didn't change my life, but it was really nice to read for Valentine's Day and around Lunar New Year, which is when I actually read it. Final book I have to talk about today is Gideon the NInth by Tamsin Muir. I always feel like I'm saying her name wrong. I read this book as a blind date with a book challenge. I have a vlog for that. I'll link it down below. I thought this book was great. I am all in on that series, 100%. Necromancers, yes please. It's kind of a sci-fantasy where we're following a kind of a world where there are all these different types of necromancy. You have all these different planets with people specializing in different types of necromancy. And this book centers around a challenge or a trial where the heirs of these different planets have come together to try to solve this kind of mystery for the emperor. It does not go where you think it's gonna go. It's hilarious. I love the main character. I love the other characters. The only thing I would say is a negative about this book would be that there are a lot of characters to remember. Even by the end of the book, I was still having to reference the index at the beginning to remind myself who some of these people were. I thought the ending was so exciting, and I'm so excited to read the second book. I gave it 5 stars, and it was a real surprise for me. So if it's something you've been thinking about reading, but you're not sure, I'd recommend, giving it a try. It's not exactly something that I would usually read, but I loved it so much. One thing that I thought it would be fun to do with my monthly wrap-up videos is share a little bit of my reading spreadsheet that I keep. I did not invent this spreadsheet. I actually purchased it from someone on Etsy. I will link that down below if you're interested in that. No affiliation, just a satisfied customer. So there are a lot of different things that you can track in here, but I'm just gonna look at the monthly stats page for today. You can see that I read 9 books, but one of those was a DNF, so 8 is the number that I would count. I read 3,943 pages, which is more than I was expecting to read. I set myself at 3,500, so that's pretty fantastic. One of those books was a reread. I bought 0 books, and I had 7 library checkouts. The other books that I read, I got from Kindle Unlimited or I already owned. Don't buy a lot of books. That's something I'm probably gonna do a video about eventually. I don't own a lot of books. I use my library almost exclusively, especially if I've never read something before. I do like to own my favorites, so I do buy things. But I don't buy stuff I haven't read because I am extremely frugal and extremely risk averse when it comes to my money, and I'm always afraid I won't like something. So I didn't buy any books this month, but I am planning to purchase some of my books that were 5-star reads in the past few months, so look for an upcoming haul video on that. One thing that I'm trying to track this year is the amount of diverse authors that I read. In this case, I am counting diverse authors as BIPOC authors primarily. If you look, you can see that this month I read 2 authors that I categorized as diverse and 4 books that I categorized as containing LGBTQIA+ themes, and 2 books that were own voices books. So that's 22% of my total reads, which is okay, but I feel like I could do better, to be honest. I feel like I could read more by diverse authors and just kind of see a lot of different viewpoints. That's something I'm really trying to do this year. So I like that I can track this in my spreadsheet and it'll give me these fun percentages. I also have a series tracker in here, which I will do a video on at some point and talk about all of the unfinished series I have and how many I am constantly starting. And then if we look at my place where I got my books from, you can see that this year I have bought 1 book that I read, and I have 2 books from Kindle Unlimited, and everything else that I have read, I purchased. Everything else that I have read, I got from my library. You can see again there, this month I read 5 books on ebook, 2 physical, and 2 that I put down as a mixture, which means more than likely audiobook with something else. I think Circe and Gideon the NInth are the 2 books that I also used the audiobook for. And if you hear a noise in the background, it's a train. I live right by the train tracks, which most of the time I love, but not when I'm trying to film things. Okay, now we get to genre, and genre is a really interesting one for me because I don't feel like I do a very good job of diversifying my genres. You can see that this month I literally read 8 fantasies and 1 romance, and that's not great. There's a lot of fantasy, and I love fantasy, and I'm not going to apologize for that. But you look at the year, I've read 13 fantasies, 2 literary fictions, 3 romance, and 2 sci-fi. I know this upcoming month, I'm definitely going to be reading some more science fiction, so that's going to help with that. But I have a hard time motivating myself to read more realistic fiction. I would like to read more, but I read what I like, and I'm a mood reader. And if I try to force myself to read something that I'm not sure I'm going to be into, then I don't usually get to it. I used to read a lot of romance and mystery, and I don't read as much of those anymore. I really would like to read more mystery again, but I don't love thrillers. And it seems like a lot of mystery is very thriller adjacent these days, but I do have a few in the next few months that I'm planning to read. So hopefully I'm going to be able to get back into mysteries again, and that will be fun. And finally, you can see my rating scale here for the month of February. I had a fantastic month. I read 4 books that I rated 5 stars, which might be the most books I've ever rated 5-star in a month. 1 4.5, 2 4s, and 1 3.5, which was The Serpent and the Wings of Night, which was the lowest rated book, but honestly, that's probably really a higher rated book. I just didn't like the endings, so I rated it down some. Right, so that's all my stats for the month of February. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm gonna continue doing that every month because I love looking at them. I am in there every single day when I get done reading, entering how many pages I read just to watch the number go up on that chart because I love it. The spreadsheet has kind of changed my reading life a little bit. It's really helping me to see trends and patterns that I didn't know were happening. All right, so I hope that you all have a fantastic reading week. I will see you later. Bye.